Thank you, everyone. I'm Shari Goodwin. I'm so excited everyone's here, and I'm here with my good friend, Jess Nowaski. And we're going to really talk about a super important topic tonight, or this afternoon, actually, for folks on the West Coast. Happy lunch. And for folks out here on the East Coast, we're kind of winding down our day, maybe just getting started. It's been a busy time, and Jess and I were talking and thought it would be really great to share our conversation around trust and safety, with her being in law enforcement and my background. I'm actually a business strategist and an executive leadership coach. I'm a crazy, passionate horsewoman, and I integrate horses into my work as well. And boy, they'll teach you about trust and safety. Some hard lessons there sometimes. So what I'd like to do before we jump into our discussion, Jess, if you can introduce yourself to folks and give us a little background on who you are, what you do, all this awesomeness that you're doing out there in Mountain View.
Great, Shari, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. And it's reaffirming to see all the folks that volunteered to come on the show with us and kind of be a part of this conversation. And it reminds me that it's not just us, that this is important, and this is really landing with a lot of people. I think we have just been through so much in the last couple of years. Obviously, I'm in law enforcement. I'm a deputy police chief with the Mountain View Police Department, and I report to a chief of police, and I have 2 police captains in my chain of command and 2 professional staff managers that report to me as well. And it basically covers field operations, investigations, special operations, dispatch, and records. So the entire police department in one way or the other is in my chain of command. And we, I think a lot of you have seen what has been happening with law enforcement in the last couple of years, through the news, but there's just so much. It's not just about civil unrest and those things. We've had to focus more on our officers and our community, on their physical health and well-being as we are doing our job. So these things have been on our minds, and it has brought complexity. As I thought things were complex, prior to 2 years ago when they were, this has brought it to a completely new level with how rapid we have all had to respond to this environment and figure out how to do this together. And I think that is the inspiration for this conversation, quite frankly. So trust and safety in more than just a physical sense. I think we're going to get into some nuanced definitions of those as we get into our conversation today. So welcome, all of you. I see some names I recognize there. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Jess, and it's so great to be here with you. And just in the spirit of full transparency, and probably at the risk of embarrassing my brother, my brother actually works for the force as a captain, and he's amazing. So he introduced me to Jess many, many years ago, and we've been friends ever since. So it's great to be here today. As we're talking about trust and safety, for me, and I've done a lot of work on trust, as I mentioned before. I've looked at all kinds of different models. I've also been in the reinvention space many, many times in my life. I'm kind of a reinvention specialist, and I've done a lot of work there. And it's been very interesting to try to see all these different trust models. I was a former environmental scientist for 20 years. I'm a master's in biology, and I've done a lot of business development, all kinds of different things for large engineering firms and environmental engineering firms. And what I've noticed is trust means different things to different people. So I'm wondering, Jess, maybe if we just start with kind of this basic definition of what we mean by trust. You kind of know when you feel it, and it's a felt experience, really. You either kind of trust someone or you don't, and then it's like, well, do you trust them more if you know them longer? Well, not necessarily, so it's not really time-based. So what is that? So I'll just share briefly for me what I've found to be very effective is there's a trust model that was developed by Rachel Connerly and her team in North Carolina. And she talks about 3 different dimensions of trust, 3 different components. And these are competence. So can you, like in the workplace, can you do the job? Do you have the skills to do the job? Competence would be the first thing. Reliability and predictability, which is, do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you show up on time? Do you keep your word? Are you reliable and predictable in your behavior? And this applies not just to you, like self-trust, but to other people too, when you're kind of assessing whether or not you trust them. So competence, they have the skills to do the job. Do they show up on a predictable basis? Do they behave in a consistent manner? And then this third component, this third vector that she came up with is benevolence. And this one is totally different than anything I'd read anywhere else. And it's about, do you believe the other party has your best interest in mind? So for me, that's a very big deal, because how many people do you know that you can really say, oh my gosh, I know for sure they have my best interest in mind? There's probably not too many. So that's one way to define trust, and it is a felt state. So Jess, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what does trust mean to you? How do you define that?
Yeah, what your definition that you just provided actually takes me to, looking at it from a perspective of an individual trust base and an industry organizational, because I feel like I am going in and out of those two things. I need to be trusted as an individual, but always mindful that, are we making decisions in our system and our workplaces that allow the community that we serve to trust us as a whole? And that has really been put to the test again and again and again over the last decade. I mean, really for a long time, but even more so in the more recent times. And so, we have gotten more into the business of how do we need to truly create those trusting relationships with the community we serve. And in order to do that, we have to be able to trust each other. So it does come back to that individual level, and does the frontline, staff and the sworn officers on the street trust their, administration and their management folks that we have their best interests at heart, and what is it going to take for that to have happen? And really what it's come down to, from my perspective, is we have absolutely needed a culture shift in how we do business, and what got us there is not going to get us to where we need to go. And we've been taking, very deliberate steps at evaluating what in the culture supports that trusting relationship with each other and the community, and what doesn't, and stop doing the things that does not, create the trust, because that's going to be a hindrance for us to be effective in what we're doing.
Such great points, Jess. Thanks for sharing that. And it's interesting too, because as we're talking about trust, we're also talking about safety. And clearly there's a physical safety, which you guys, in law enforcement, I can't even imagine. That's just hugely busy. And then there's psychological safety. So I deal mostly with business leaders, business owners, consultants, all kinds of different folks who are playing a pretty high game. They're all super achievers. They're all amazing. Many of them are here. Hey guys, so fun. Some are reinventing and finding out new ways to greatly serve and deeply serve, and it's just incredible. And there's this piece of psychological safety, because we may physically be okay, like our all our little requirements that we have, shelter, food, we're okay, but we don't feel okay. Don't feel okay. So how do you inspire this state of psychological safety? And it gets to your point on this culture shift, whether it's an organization, and it all starts with our own personal sense of that. And one of the things that I've learned with the horses is they reflect back to you how you're showing up energetically and emotionally. And they're giving you, of course, they have their own mindset too, but they do give you this insight that you get kind of below the surface level of the stuff of life and what's happening. There's an energy there, and they can either trust you or they don't trust you. And they don't even really have to know you. They can just feel immediately. It's an intuitive hit. So, we're going to explore a little bit about that today. And just so you know, we're going to talk, Des and I are going to talk a little bit. Feel free to use the chat to ask some questions. We will have an open discussion at the end. We want to hear your thoughts on things. We want to hear, what's coming up for you, what brought you here, what do you hope to experience even today? In fact, right now, if you can take a moment and say, what do you hope to gain from this conversation today? You're here, you give us some time. We're so grateful for that. Is there something specific that you hope to take away today? If you want to drop that in the chat right now, it'll help us guide, our conversation. Of course, we have all our approaches and tactics and things that we're going to share with you in a minute. But if there's something else specific that you'd like to take away, please put it in the chat. Don't be shy. I'm sure you're not the only one, with that idea. So be bold, and we'll address that in a minute. So getting back to this concept you were talking about, organizational, and culturally. So where do you start with that? I mean, that's huge. Where it seems like it could be completely overwhelming and daunting. Where's the start?
Yeah, and I'll apologize because I'm going to come from probably a leadership orientation by virtue of my position here at the police department, and I am a parent. So to a lot of extent, I practice leadership, capabilities with parenting. And, for us and for me, I think it starts with the individual. It starts with a movement. I mean, you have to have participants involved in communicating and recognizing that something needs to change in order for us to meet the world where it is currently. And I think that starts with awareness, individual awareness, and then awareness as an organization. And if you're not in the habit of checking in with yourself and paying attention to your own personal awareness, that's a starting place. And I know that sounds, I think through this conversation, and Shari, you and I spoke about this in preparation for this, is that some of what we're going to offer may sound so simple and small and basic, but there doesn't have to be massive sweeping change to create the positive impact that we're looking for. It doesn't have to be that. It's small, deliberate, intentional, incremental steps that are moving you in a direction of where you need to go and how you need to be. And I could share just a little bit, as we're reflecting on this, and at the height of the lockdown last year in March, April, May, when there was probably the most amount of uncertainty, I would even say in the first couple of weeks, we were all pretty certain that kids were going to go back to school in a couple of weeks, that they were going to figure this out. I don't know if we all necessarily thought this was going to go on for as long as it did, at least initially. And that level of uncertainty that just really changed the way we were doing work, doing our business. Kids were at home. People from many industries got sent home, and we're doing, all the things COVID, and then our safety, health-wise, being in jeopardy because now we're dealing with a pandemic on top of everything else. And then come the end of May, you have the killing of George Floyd. And for us in law enforcement was a very pivotal moment that things then got even more uncertain for us with civil unrest and protests and, changing in policies and procedures and how we were showing up. And so I realized that I was experiencing a sensation of overwhelm, just completely buried. My goal every day was just to bring my head up and be able to take a breath. And what I noticed is if I thought about all of it in a big swath, in a big chunk, and tried to have my brain solve all of the challenges that were in front of me at one time, that's where the overwhelm would be at its highest. And I really was forced to rely on some practices that I have had in the past and have learned over the recent years of just staying very focused on the present moment. I started a gratitude practice that I had kind of done on and off, but last year was absolutely, it was day after day that I stayed very present for what I was grateful for, to just keep myself centered and to keep my brain wrapped around the things that I knew I can control. Because our brain does not like uncertainty. It feels very uncomfortable when it can't solve the problem or doesn't know what's coming next. And I felt that was a very different quality to the stress. I mean, there's day-to-day stress that we all could speak about, but what has been brought on in the last 18 months was a different quality of stress. That was uncertainty that we kind of shared in that a little bit, but we all had our own individual story and our own individual challenge. So I would wake up in the morning before the kids did. pour myself that cup of coffee, sit down at my table after opening the blinds and having the sun come in, and just open my, I have a Panda planner, and I would open that and there's a page in there for each day that you can use to focus your attention on what you're grateful for, what you're going to be focused on, affirmation. And I just leaned into that practice every single day. And I don't know how I would have shown up, how much worse things would have got had I not had that as a supportive mechanism, but it kept me in the current moment. It kept my attention deliberately focused on the things that were going well. There were some silver linings in COVID, the flexibility in schedule. Basically, we had to allow our employees to have some flexibility with their schedule. One, to keep them physically safe because of the pandemic, but two, because our kids aren't in school. And so you can't expect, parents to leave their kids at home alone. And so I got really good at working from home. And I would get more stuff done sometimes at home than if I came into the office in the past. And so those things got to work out, and there was some really nice benefits of that I was able to intentionally focus on that helped my brain from getting too overwhelmed.
That's just amazing, Jess, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's such an incredibly stressful job that all of you guys on the front lines in law enforcement, and thank you for all your help, everyone who's on the line today and who's listening to the recording, for everything you've done over the past couple of years. Oh my gosh. One of the questions here, to your point around self-awareness and this creating this feeling of dealing with overwhelm. So we have a couple of questions from the chat. How do I create a safe place for others when I'm not feeling super safe or stable in my life? So you talked about being a leader and having these practices. So and those are like stabilizing, getting present. And how do you as a leader in a position of authority like that shore yourself up? And do you ever have, I'm curious, I'm gonna pile on to that chat question, as do you ever have like a sense, I don't know if you can even answer this properly, a fraud, like you're putting it on, like I don't really feel like I'm all there, but I have to act like it, I'm in this role and I'm supposed to be. So how do you deal with, maybe you don't have this, but how do you deal with the disconnect, kind of this like, I don't know if I'm even feeling all that today, but I got to be it and I got to show up as if.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I absolutely. And any of the strategies that, we're talking about today, that none of them, or even all of them, are a panacea. It is a constant, like I said, I felt like I was just trying to keep my head above water at times. There were moments where I felt, okay, I could breathe, everything's going to be okay. I was calm. And then there were moments where things were like uncertain, or things were constantly happening at work. And it just felt like things just kept getting piled on over and over. And so there's a level of authenticity that has to be valued when you're showing up to the workplace, to where I almost kind of the metaphor that I think about is if you have to pretend, you're almost making it worse, because the pain of pretending is that resistance and that, oh, I'm not going to feel the pain, I'm just going to ignore it. But sometimes when we try to ignore things, it actually makes it worse. So instead of doing that, there's this level of authenticity where you have to be, not to a point of vulnerability where you're, not capable of functioning and moving on, or you don't want to completely have emotional meltdowns in the office. But I think the culture that we've been able to establish, at least on our command staff team, there was psychological safety enough for us to sit around and say, whew, man, how are you guys doing? This is crazy. How's this affecting you? How are your kids? How's the husband? How's the wife? And those were moments that reminded me that I'm not in this by myself, that I don't have to get through this by myself, and that we need each other. And so, it reminded me too that although none of our circumstances are identical, we all have different things going on and different challenges showing up in different ways, but that we all have a story. That if you think of the iceberg and the water line, that there's so much going on below the water line, and we just kind of slowed things down when we could. There were times where we had to make quick decisions. We found out that there was, a protest happening, and we had to put together a team to go out and make sure that they were safe and everything was, operationally sound. So those were those times. I'm not talking about doing that all the time, but, in the beginning of meetings, we would have check-ins with each other, and, just even if it was on Zoom, it had to be an acknowledgement that this is crazy. These are crazy times, and that we're in this together. And that vulnerability, being able to be vulnerable with each other, I think led to that psychological safety and allowed us to feel like, okay, it's not just me, it's not just me, lacking the grit or resistance or the resilience to handle this, that these are just really unprecedented times that are creating such a challenge. But even the most capable people are also struggling.
Yeah.
And so that when that was that, I think that is the beginning. I don't know, I'm sure some workplaces don't offer that. And what do you do in those times? I think you have to seek out the support where you could find it.
Such great points, Justin. What I'm hearing there is this real sense of community. This is about building that trust, trusting yourself enough to be vulnerable and share your own authentic, raw emotions, potentially with others that you trust. So you kind of create this sacred community. And we've done that a little bit with one of the masterminds that I'm running. And oh my gosh, what the 2020 mastermind, the 2021, I mean, just a circle of people who are amazing and share at such a deep level. And it doesn't have to be a mastermind, but being very mindful about the kinds of people you're surrounding yourself with, I think is so important. And we can choose, and they're not always family members. We talk about, family love, and it's so wonderful to be with your family. Well, sometimes it's not so much. Sometimes family members are toxic, and you have to kind of say, all right, I love you, and you're not the one that I'm going to for the support, and try to really intentionally build that circle, build that community. It doesn't need to be a huge circle, just someone outside of self, because I hear you saying, it's not just me. And I've had that too. I'm upholding this thing as a leadership coach and working with executives, and they're all holding space for their own teams and all the people that they're working with and their families to try to maintain some type of consistency and some confidence and some hope for the future. And there is a lot of hope for the future. So I want to pivot a little bit, because this is a different perspective. So there's kind of all of the struggle and the strife. And I'm just going to throw this other piece in. I've actually had many clients who've had their best financial performance ever over the past couple of years. They've had their best lifestyle improvements ever. One of my clients, former client, he's now retired. He just found the love of his life. Almost 70. These are wonderful celebrations because he had time and the other woman had time and they met each other, all these things. So there was an interesting other piece of psychology, which some of us are like, wow, how could this even happen? People had like success guilt. I'm feeling great in COVID and I'm profiting in COVID. Some of these business owners, especially in these different industries that were able to really pivot and become very much highly desired in demand, and they're making a huge amount of money kind of off the pandemic, and it's not a bad thing. It's just they're providing great service. But that created a whole nother of interesting area of, is that okay? Is it okay for me to be happy? Is it okay for me to feel good about this? Yeah. So it's such an interesting thing, as we go through this human evolution process, we're faced with all these different types of experiences, giving ourselves permission to feel our feelings, whether they're positive, negative, whatever they are. And so one of the things I'll share with you, were talking about the Panda Journal, which is awesome, and the intentions and gratitude. And one of the things that I use, I'll just share this as an approach, is every day I go through the 4 different areas of kind of like aspects of life, the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And I check in with myself. So mental would be, and I just do like MEPS, and I just do a quick journal check. Like mentally, mentally is, what am I thinking? Oh, I hate this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not so good. But that's where I am, so maybe I should be a little more mindful about policing, pardon the pun, the thought there, what kind of thought, because really all of this is it's a leadership process, right? We need to lead our own selves, steward our own minds, steward our own bodies, so that we can be instruments for transformation, or instruments of positivity, instruments of safety and trust for others to be able to feel that. But if we're feeling pretty raw, okay, we get straight with ourselves, check the thought, check the emotional state. How do I feel? So thought is how I'm feeling. What am I thinking? Emotions of what am I feeling? And then I go to the physical. How am I feeling physically, and what am I noticing in my physical world? And you can tell a lot about that. Like, are you looking at all the dust bunnies in the corner? Or are you looking at, the beautiful trees or the flowers in your yard? I don't know, whatever you're focusing on. And then spiritually, am I connecting with something greater than myself, kind of my raison d'etre, my reason for being? And it doesn't have to be a religious thing. It's something, could be a community thing, could be a goal, something bigger than self. It doesn't just end right here at this 5'6" little body over here. There's more. But I want to add something to the physical piece. You can create. So I do a lot of studying on neuroscience. I was a scientist in a former career, so I'm always really curious about, how do you hack your mind? How do you really blend the optimum cocktail to get the right kind of energy for whatever task you're facing? And it's in being intentional. I need a little more dopamine, I need more oxytocin, maybe a smidge of adrenaline to keep the drive in there, but not too much, because it'll go over the top, and then that's too much. So stimulating the vagus nerve through breathing exercises and getting yourself into that parasympathetic nervous system on a daily basis, so that it's like a muscle. We have to practice. This is why we call mindfulness practices, meditation practice, journaling practice, whatever it is, exercise practice, because practice makes it available to you when you really need it. Because if it's weak and you're really struggling, it's not really there for you. So I try to do these things on a daily basis, and the breathing with the vagus nerve, and some of these things you can look up on the internet if you're not already familiar with them. There's tons of stuff. So anyway, just thought I'd add a little bit about that. So where are we? Questions? Anybody have thoughts and questions so far? I appreciate the chat comments that have come in already. Yeah, being able to own that raw emotion, share it with others, is a way to humanize our law enforcement. Yeah, absolutely. That's to your point, Jess. Every day, fake it till you make it. I don't know if you guys ever watched Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer. I love that guy. So yeah. he did this cool thing with the dog once. It was super insecure, and this is to the fake it till you make it. And he took the dog's tail, and he put the tail up. So dogs are real insecure, has a little tail stuck between the legs. So he manually pulled the tail up, he lifted up the head, and he started making it kind of walk like that. Mm-hmm. So it adopted a frame, a body position, right? And it was like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's all stuck like this. It's like, oh, I can't move. And he's like, hey, come on. And all of a sudden it started getting movement. And then it was like, yeah, dude, I rock. And it all of a sudden had like all this little confidence, and it started strutting along, and it was all happy. So there is something to the fake it till you make it. Sometimes we can't rely on our emotional state because it's fried. The mental state's fried. But we can physically give ourselves a form and just work that form, even though there's a little madness, craziness going on upstairs here, and just keep going there, and all of a sudden it starts to rebalance on its own.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I felt like I did that a little bit. I just, as soon as the lockdown happened, I thought, oh my gosh, I cannot be locked down. I have to be on the go. I'm a mover, a fast talker, a fast walker. I got to be doing stuff. And I thought that this is not going to work for me. And immediately that very first weekend, we were supposed to be in Tahoe for my birthday, that first weekend on the lockdown. And I'm like, well, I guess get your mountain bikes out, check up the tires. We're going mountain bike riding locally, because we were like, I've got to be outside. I've got to be doing something. And I think that I relied on that. I don't know if I remember doing it on purpose, but in looking back at what I did, with the hiking and the biking and the outdoor activity, that was an area that really got amped up in mine and my family's life, because we didn't have time for all those things before. And now it was what, was left for us to do. And it really did, I think, elevate our mood and help us pass time, that created, some sense of calm and control over our environment and what was happening with us mentally or emotionally. So I love that whole idea. And then, the work, haven't talked about, the working out. You said some people have had their best. I've seen people lose weight and be in the best shape of their lives because some of the junk in their schedule got cleared out, and now they're not commuting, an hour or two back and forth to work, and they're able to really focus on themselves. Some home gyms got put. So I remember a time where you couldn't find a kettlebell. You couldn't buy a free weight because we bought a rowing machine, cleaned up our garage. Finally our gym opened up outside, and we started attending outdoor classes. So that for me has been a complete savior. If anything else, it's been the constant, something that I can go to that is supportive of health, me and my health, and almost more mental health for me than physical health. Although I feel like it's helping me keep strong. I'm not losing weight, but it's helping me stay strong, which I think is sometimes more important.
Yeah, such a great point. And the thing is, you got to find what works for you. Some people it's a blend, because this can be kind of overwhelming. Oh my gosh, I got to journal, I got to meditate, I got to say gratitudes, I got to work out, I got to, gotta. And it's just like a full-time job just trying to self-care. So we got to kind of figure out what's the combination of things that you can do in the most efficient way. And so we encourage you guys to, whatever you're already doing, it's working, do it. If you want to try some other little things, great, try them. Play with this. You want to create lateness and joy around this. That's one of the things is I do know for sure from working with horses and just people in general is at any moment, really, you can reinvent. And it starts with being aware, as Jess was saying earlier, self-awareness. What state am I currently in? So if we just use a purely straight analysis, here I'm in state A and I'm feeling, okay. Well, at any moment, I can actually move to state B, even if I pretend and I'm like acting, like put on the role, put on the thing. You can actually move yourself to state B pretty quick. And you have to decide, you have to figure out what works for you to create that catalyst, right? You want to catalyze that reaction from A to B. So what is it for you? Sometimes for me, it's movement, it's physical movement. Sometimes it's a mental thing. Sometimes I just need to change the activity I'm working on. I am really big into this neuroscience thing. Like, for example, one day I was working with a friend on Zoom, and she was struggling with a client. She was struggling with the name of a new program she was launching. And she's like, well, you're really creative. You think of something. And of course, I can't think of anything the minute someone says that. And I said, hold on a minute. And I stood on one leg, and then I hopped a little bit, right? I'm like right here at this desk. I stood on one leg. She said, what are you doing? Hang on, I'm hopping around. And then I came up with it. Right? So it just complete change of balance, orientation, just mixed up the stuck energy and landed in something different. So sometimes even things like walking backwards, you might walk backwards and be careful so you don't fall over. I don't want to cause a safety risk here, but there's these small little things that once you get aware, you can care, and then you can experiment and explore and see what might work for you. One of the things we talked about before, Jess, too, is clearing energy drains and energy loops. So this is really important. We all have these activities, or this to-do list, or something that's taking up mental space. So when we talk about getting present, we want to eliminate these negative energy drains and these spins. So it would be like thinking about what was undone, or something that you could have done better, or something that you have to do next, because all of that is not present, right? It's either in the past or in the future. So we want to wrap that up. What do I need to wrap that up right now? Either stop thinking about it or take some action to finish up, get it to a point where it's done. You can check it off and done enough. It's at its next phase. Those are really important things. And then another thing is sometimes, and I've found this a lot lately in the past couple of years now, or 18 months, I'm super sensitive. I'm like crazy intuitive person. I don't know if I get that from working with horses or what, but I am. So I will sponge up other people's energy and not realize it, and including negative energy and like off energy. And then all of a sudden I'm like, like what's happening? And I'm like, God, there's this crazy thing in my, and then what happens? Here's a cool thing. If I ask myself, I can say to myself an affirmation. I release that energy from my experience, and I allow myself to have my own experience. If it's my energy that's crazy, I won't feel any different. And I'm like, oh, that's mine. Okay,
Yeah.
so I got to do something else. Inevitably, it disappears.
Yeah.
It's somebody else's little energetic hanger-on that was stuck on me that I didn't even know it was creating all this drama.
Yeah.
Do you get that? Do you get energetic
Absolutely.
hang-ons?
There's a gal that does classes for California Police Chiefs Association and the IACP, the International Association of Police Chiefs, and she's a doctor of psychology, and she literally bought a poop emoji, and she does this one talk where she walks around and she's like, if you're carrying around something that's not yours, then you get to give the poop emoji to somebody else. Like, that's not my poop, that's your poop. And the metaphor is perfect because it's what you're describing, is to say, is it something that is really in your sphere of influence that's going to affect your life, or are you taking in, and you could do that on a micro level with people in your life and at the workplace, or it could be on what's happening in the world. So I noticed that I had to, I was in a position to be responsible for what is changing in COVID. And so I'm glued to the news, what's happening, then the civil unrest is happening and the fires are happening, and I'm paying attention to all of those things. And it was overload. It was really causing me to overwhelm. And I had to find a way to back off of just having news come at me as a fire hose. And I had to surgically go in and look for information that I needed and then back away from it. And I experimented with that. So some of the things, if I could reflect on what you were saying, is we're throwing out a lot of ideas to all of you right now, and in reflection of our experience. And if you're looking for a place to start, I would suggest the first place to start is with some sort of practice that you could become aware of yourself, aware of your energy and what's happening for you, and maybe identify, is there something you can say, gosh, I really wish this could change. If you wanted something to be different, if you want to, maybe your sleep, maybe you're not getting enough sleep, maybe you feel like your nutrition or your intake of water is not, just start simple and experiment with what works for you, paying attention and reflecting back on what you've done. And I noticed in hindsight that I would start to crave the things that make me feel better. So I don't know at one point who was more happy to go on a walk, my dog or me, because that was my way of putting in my AirPods and popping in either an audio book that I was enjoying or a podcast. And it was sort of a meditation of a way for me to kind of check out and give myself a little slice of time to just take a walk. And I have a dog, so it was perfect. So that worked out. It may be a full-on workout with a Peloton for some of you. It may be a run or a hike. It may be going through and cleaning up your house so that everything's in order so that you could focus. But we're just offering that maybe experimenting with what has that positive impact on yourself so that you're in a better headspace, because things are coming at us. We step out of the door, and with COVID, with lockdown, it was in our house because if our kids were there, it's almost like we couldn't find that place to escape. But as we're floating through our worlds, whatever that is, it seems like more and more things are divisive, that you can't enter a conversation where people don't have really strong opinions about one thing or the other, and that this is wrong and that's wrong and it's their fault. And we're in that environment, which I think is challenging us more, to have those trust and safe environments for ourselves and for our teams at work or our family. And, there are some strategies that you and I, Shari, had talked about on what do we, how can we engage differently? There was a question earlier in the chat, how do we create? And again, some of these skill sets go back to, or these things that we practice go back to some fundamentals, but just the quality and the way that we listen to each other. If you switch your intention from listening with the purpose of being right and having a rebuttal, has a much different quality in a conversation than if you listen with the intention just to understand, not necessarily to be right or to argue or to overcome, but to really genuinely try to understand more of where this person is coming from, even if it's on a topic that you adamantly disagree with. to have the practice of setting that intention clearly with your own self, that will resonate out and have an impact beyond what you could imagine. And we've seen that happen here. We've had to lean into that more and more. We were already in a process of doing that within the Mountain View Police Department with using coaching as a managerial coaching to support our leadership development. So we were, paying attention to the quality of the conversations and dialogue that we were having internally. And then, of course, last year, really upped the ante for us to do that with our community as well.
That's so beautiful, Jess. And I love that you guys have incorporated coaching, a coach approach, kind of, this process of inquiry and discovery. And Anne Roche talks about curiosity versus judgment. Oh my gosh, totally great point. That's exactly what you're talking about. And, this is the thing. My husband, this is, super personal. So my husband and I don't have the same political views. So you can imagine, right? We could lock down right here in the house. And you can, so how do you, and we've been married over 25 years, right? So I love the guy. I trust the guy. I trust him, right? I trust him. I'm just reflecting on that now. I just said that. I love him. I trust him. I don't necessarily agree with him.
Yeah.
Right. So it's okay. We can agree to disagree. And that's like the lost art of debate. I don't know whatever happened to that. You're not seeing that on the stage, on the news or anything anymore. They just kill each other. But there's this appreciation for disparate views, for hearing from people you may not agree. But the thing is, I've learned this, and it's really kind of hard, is you can actually learn the most from the people that you don't agree with. As long as you can listen, you can really hear. It's hard. I'm not always great at it because I come in thinking I'm all open and listening and all that. And immediately I can feel a judgment flare, right? I can feel that. So that now as a coach, this is what we do as coaches. We're like, oh, how interesting. You just notice that little edge. Oh, how interesting. Okay, that gives me another second before I'm ready to, but and when you get real mature, which I'm not quite there yet, then you're like, oh, how interesting. And you just kind of let it go and you learn something from that. So I'm evolving into that space. That's what I aspire to do and be. But let's see if we're at a quarter of here. So I want to open the line for more questions, for some comments. People, if you have a comment or there's something that resonates with you, if you can pop it in the chat, we'll look for that now. Or if there's something you guys need, do you want some more specific stuff? I've got a whole bunch of lists of other things, but the complaint-free zone. Oh, that was really fun. I set this up because someone was with the barn, you come in after work or whatever. And I said, all right, I'm setting up a complaint-free zone, a peace zone, sacred space, no negativity, no complaining, no nothing. And it can be a little spot, it could be like this little chair behind me or, the little room, whatever it is. And I'll tell you, if you set intention and you kind of carve that out and you go in there, boy, you're going to feel safe. It's a different energy. It's totally different. And I didn't want my horses subject to any of the complaining, the negativity from the world, all these different things. So I don't need them sucking up that kind of stuff. So I said the barn is a negativity-free zone. It's a complaint-free zone. I forget, quite frankly, every once in a while. I have to say I do complain sometimes. Probably did this morning. But then I remember and I apologize. And so I'm not perfect. We're all works in progress here, but you might want to try that and just say, this part of the living room is a complaint-free zone. There's my peace spot. If I'm in here, I don't want to hear any complaining. I don't want to hear anything. This is our peace place. And just notice if it feels different. Okay, so what is the recommended tool? What is a tool that you recommend to use to persuade or convince? I'm going to give that to you, Jess.
Yeah, I think the context is important there, and it really depends on what you're talking about. And in order for anything that you have to say, it is always going to work better if the other person believes, one, that you have a positive intention in the conversation in the first place. And part of that is really hearing where they're coming from. And the best place for me to describe that is with a conversation with my husband. And, especially when he is, amped up about something or has, he's in the military. So he has some strong opinions about a lot of things. and sometimes it's not that I agree or disagree with him. I may have an opinion. I'm a pretty strong-minded person myself, but I'm truly just understanding where are you getting that? You made this bold statement, curious where you're coming from with that. And as I have him dissect it or unpack it, if you will, and kind of backstep to figure out where has he been informed, sometimes I could figure out his thought process. And if I'm able to introduce an alternative, like, okay, well, if that wasn't the case, because for some people that may not be the case, this is the case over here, then he's able to broaden his perspective and loosen up on his opinion. And it's not as stringent, it's not as tightly woven as it originally comes across. So it's really, I think, in the dialogue itself and the back and forth, instead of it being a duel where you're going at it, you really do have to have the intentions. The other example I will give you is we at the police department, in fact, your brother, my colleague, started this idea and brought a bunch of people in the police department together for a program along with our PIO coordinator, Katie Nelson, and brought together a program called MVPDX. And what it is inviting a handful of stakeholders, 10 or 12 folks from the community that are certainly not necessarily our, cheerleaders. They're not our, people that you would automatically assume, oh, they have the police department's best interest. They're in the community, but they have some hard questions for us. And we bring them in and we have conversations, and they've put together this wonderful curriculum of topics. One, for us to teach them about what we do and why we do it, and for them to ask questions about that and to have a go back and forth. Now, our intention in doing this is not to persuade or convince. But what I will tell you is 9 times out of 10, most of the folks that walk away from that experience having gained knowledge that 1, we're human, 2, we care, 3, they have developed some trust with us, they end up being convinced that we mean no harm and that we truly do have positive intentions on serving the community in the very best manner we can. Even if we may disagree on how to get there, we have found some common ground. So I want to say it comes back to the listening, the ability to really listen deeply, and then to, when you're modeling that in a conversation, even if the other person isn't attempting to model that, sometimes there's that dynamic where they will mirror you and they will go along with the flow. And I've noticed that with my husband too. So no extra charge, you take that home.
So good, Jess. Yeah, if someone feels heard, they're often open to other views. That's right, Stephen. Yeah. And, it is that. And the other thing is noticing how attached we are to an outcome. Notice how attached we are to a position. So the more attached we can be to something, the more restricted we actually are. All right. So there's, and it's an interesting thing. So if I want something desperately to happen, if it's coming from a place of fear that it's not going to happen, so there's an underlying fear energy, fear motivator, you may not even be aware of it. But if it's coming from that, and you talked about positive intent, this would be not positive intent, right? There's a fear motivator there. You're driving people away. So this is the deal. This is one of the biggest things I've ever learned from working with horses. And when I'm talking about working with horses, I'm not talking about making them do stuff. I can make them do all kinds of stuff. I want their willful participation, like engagement, happy to do it, joyful engagement. That's what I'm looking for. And that's what I'm looking for in anybody I work with as well. That's what I was looking for when I used to have a real job in corporate and lead all kinds of teams and do all kinds of stuff. I always ask my teammates, why are you here? You're here by choice. It's your choice to be here. You can work someplace else, really, honestly. So really empowering yourself to say, why am I so attached to this? What's disempowering me about this? Because that's actually a weakened state. So what we want to do is flip it and say, what if I just let that go a little bit and really think about what are in the best interests of this situation? Jesse, you were talking about the best situation of the community, opening the door and being detached from the outcome of what happens from those conversations, right? You're just opening the door. And so it's this neutral energy. And this is kind of the energy that when I talk about that and I think about that, it's when horses are all grazing in a field, right? Their heads are down, they're just grazing. They're just grazing. There's no threat, there's no nothing, it's just grazing. And all of a sudden there's a threat, whoop, head goes up, ears go up, alarm, they might snort, they might do something, might turn, might run. They look at each other, there's this like flocking behavior. How's he reacting? Well, he's scared. We do the same thing. We do the same darn thing. And it might just be an undercurrent of energy that sweeps through the room all of a sudden. And you're like, whoop, everybody's on alert. So as leaders, it's really important for us to mitigate that and to create that vibration, that energy of safety and trust and positive intent, detaching from an outcome other than that of, peace and respect, certainly in those listening sessions. Okay, great. Any other thoughts, questions? Great questions, you guys. Thank you so much for all of this. What about for you, Jess? What's coming up for you? How are you feeling?
Yeah, there's a couple of examples. When you talk about that heightened state of awareness, we talk about that in law enforcement as a hypervigilance. And because it's embedded in us even more so with our training, because we're constantly having to be on and in that alert zone more often than not. And that sometimes falls back to being our go-to or default mode. And so for people, and I would say not just law enforcement professionals, but people in the first responder, with lately with medical care professionals, same type of thing where they're just on all of the time and experiencing that burnout. That would be a place where I would suggest they pay attention and look for places to allow themselves to be in a safe environment to disconnect from that level of alertness. Because it's just that hypervigilance is going to wear us out, and it's going to burn our sensory. It's going to put us on edge. We're going to have a really hard time setting a positive intention for listening deeply. And the example that comes to mind, and really from a leadership perspective, and I'll throw my chief Christian under the bus a little bit here, but he is such a modest, wonderful, loving human being, that he had the most positive intentions. He just wanted to visit all of the briefings. We had a policy come out from the city recently that was not so favorable by some members of the organization. And, he thought, well, there's nothing he could do about changing the policy, but by gosh, he can go in there and be a sounding board for his employees, because it's important that they know that they're important, that he hears them and he knows what their concerns are. And it wasn't with any, set idea to change their minds or force anything down their throat or convince them of anything. It was out of respect and love that they were having a hard time with a new policy for whatever reason. And our chief was going to go in and give his time to say, your thoughts and opinions and this disruption and frustration, it matters to me. And I'm here for you. What is it that's going on for you? And that's all. He didn't try to convince anybody of anything. He was just there to listen. And I think it feels like that did us a great service, because it brought us together, even though we're still working through the logistics of, to some an unpopular policy that we're having to, logistically kind of scramble through. I think it showed them the respect that they matter, that they do matter and their voices matter. And he took the time out of his day to do that. And we have to remember sometimes that's more powerful than we give credit to. Really listening and being there for others and being that sounding board. And then the flip side is finding that safe space for us to do the same. Where can I don't always sound, this caring and compassionate. There are times where I have really strong opinions and I want to say them, and I'm angry about something, maybe from a fear-based, and I have to know when I could be in that safe environment to have, express those, and then kind of set myself back to that neutral place.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Jess, and I feel that the point that you made about your chief is so beautiful, and it brings up the two things for me: the importance of just the leadership presence, just in every way, this neutral, listening, open presence. So that's one, leadership presence. And he didn't have to have the answers, right? So as leaders, we don't have to have all the answers. We're not expected to have all the answers. What we do need to do is listen deeply. We need to listen deeply from a place of benevolence, so that folks can feel safe. And the only way that folks can feel safe is if we can work to calm our own selves enough. We don't have to be perfect, but just enough to be able to relax and just open a little bit of the aperture, a little bit of the window to relax and allow others to be heard and allow ourselves to be heard. So we don't have to be all, Buddha sitting here all meditative and calm. Forget that, because this is, there's a lot of uncertainty and we fluctuate all the time. As long as we're making that attempt and we're conscious of creating a little bit of space where others can be heard and where we can be heard ourselves. So I'm curious about, for folks, would be the same for convincing the other upper levels. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're managing up, managing across, managing anybody, it's all the same kind of thing. In my opinion, be the same thing. So I think, Justin, when you and I met earlier, we were talking about, one step that each person might take away, so what, if you guys want to write in the chat, maybe one thing you might want to try, or you're committing to, or you're thinking about, or maybe you've learned from today. If you want to share that in the chat, that'd be helpful, just to see what's hitting and what your plan is. And it's also fun to kind of put it out there as a declaration that, I'm gonna try something new. I'm gonna try one little thing, even if it's 5 minutes of meditation or 5 minutes of working out or something. So what do you guys got there? Anybody want to be bold and say something? What are you doing, Jess? You doing anything differently? You going to commit to anything differently? I'll put you right on the spot. I'm thinking too. I'm like, what am I going to do differently? I could probably hold the space a little bit better for my husband. I've been working on that, and it's interesting that fact that we do have different views on things. We have both been very respectful of each other's viewpoints, and we've been able to have pretty open listening sessions to each other that have gotten deeper. And I think probably our relationship is better. I'm not going to say it's like hugely better, remarkably better, but I think it's better, because there was a point in the beginning kind of where it was all heightened and everything, and I was all triggered. I'm like, I don't know if I can stay with this guy. How can I be married to a person who has these opposing views? I mean, how is this possible? And that was all hysteria. Listening with intention is huge. Really like that. I don't need answers right away, but I like to know I'm being heard. Thank you, Emily. Awesome. Yep, everybody's zooming.
Steve, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Anybody else want to share? We're hitting the witching hour. I know everybody's about to jump off, but thank you guys, all of you, for participating today, for being with us. We're so grateful for your time and your energy and your support. And if you'd like to hear more at another session, let us know as well. We'll be sending around the recording. And thank you, Jess. It's been great to be with you today and to hear your insights. You're brilliant.
I am so in awe of you. It is so wonderful to work and talk to you no matter what. So thank you for having me on today.
Thank you. All righty. Thanks, everyone. Oh, such great comments. Look forward to trying some out. It's so great to hear from you, Laura, RT, Diana, all these great people. Jill, thanks. Stephen, wonderful. All right.
You, girl.
Bye for now.